The autumn leaves drifted down like whispered memories in Riverside Park that Thursday afternoon. James Crawford sat on his usual bench, the one facing the old oak tree, holding his coffee but not really tasting it. 43 years old, dressed in his navy suit from another long day at the accounting firm, he found himself once again in that familiar space between work and an empty apartment. He'd been coming to this bench for 3 months now, ever since Margaret left. Not dramatically, not with anger, just quietly, the way a season changes. 37 years together, and one day she'd said she needed to find herself again. He still didn't quite understand it, but he was learning to sit with that confusion. The little girl appeared like a dandelion wish made real. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old, with honey blonde hair catching the golden light, wearing a blue dress that had seen better days but was clean and pressed with care. Pink sneakers that lit up when she walked. She carried a canvas tote bag that seemed almost as big as she was, and she was moving from person to person on the path with determined purpose. James watched her approach an elderly woman on a walker, saw the woman smile and shake her head gently, watched the little girl nod politely and move on to a young couple holding hands. Same result. Each time, the child's shoulders drooped just a little more, but she kept going. When she reached his bench, she stopped directly in front of him. Her eyes were gray-blue like the sky before snow, and they held a seriousness that seemed too old for her small face. "Hello," she said, her voice clear and careful like she'd practiced. "My name is Sophie Reynolds. I'm having a birthday party on Saturday, and I would like you to come." James blinked, caught off guard. He'd gotten used to being invisible in crowds, just another middle-aged man passing through. "Oh," he said. "Well, that's very kind, but I'm sure your parents want you to invite your friends from school." "I don't really have friends at school yet," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "We just moved here 2 months ago, and Mommy said I could invite whoever I wanted, so I'm inviting nice people from the park." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was a hand-drawn invitation, the kind a child makes with crayons and fierce concentration. A crooked birthday cake with 4 candles, balloons that looked more like flowers, the words written in an adult's careful printing, Sophie's 4th birthday party. Saturday, 2 p.m., apartment 3C, 412 Riverside Drive. "I'm inviting 10 people," Sophie continued, "because Mommy said that's all our apartment can fit. You're number 7. James felt something crack open in his chest, some place that had been sealed up tight. "Does your mom know you're talking to strangers in the park?" "You're not a stranger," Sophie said with a child's simple logic. "You're the man who feeds the squirrels and always says, 'Excuse me,' when you walk past people. I've seen you here lots of times. Mommy watches from that bench over there." She pointed, and James looked. About 50 feet away, a woman sat bundled in a thick cardigan despite the mild day. Even from this distance, he could see how thin she was, how carefully she held herself. She gave a small wave, an apologetic smile. He could see the exhaustion in the way she sat. "Mommy's sick," Sophie said, following his gaze. "She has cancer in her blood. Leukemia, it's called. She says she's going to be fine, but she gets very tired. That's why we can't have a big party, but she said we could still have a small one. Because birthdays are important." The child's matter-of-fact tone somehow made it more heartbreaking. "Sophie," James said gently, "I'm honored you'd invite me, truly. But birthday parties are for people who know you, who can bring you real presents and—" "I don't need presents," Sophie interrupted. "I have toys. What I need is people. Mommy says the best present is people showing up. She says it means something when people take time to be with you." James looked at this little girl with her serious eyes and her homemade invitations, standing in a park inviting strangers to her birthday party. Because she had no friends yet and her mother was dying, though she was probably too young to fully understand that part, he thought. About his empty apartment. About the birthday parties he and Margaret used to throw, full of laughter and neighbors and her famous chocolate cake. About how quiet everything had become. "What time did you say?" he asked. Sophie's face transformed like sunrise breaking. 2 o'clock on Saturday. Apartment 3C, we're having pizza and cake. Mommy makes the best cake even though she gets tired. She's making it Friday night so she can rest on Saturday. She handed him the invitation with both hands. Like it was something precious. "I'll be there," James said, and meant it. Sophie beamed at him, then carefully marked something in a small notebook she pulled from her bag. "That's 7 people who said yes." "Thank you, Mr. Crawford." "James Crawford. But you can call me Mr. James." "Thank you, Mr. James. I have 3 more invitations. Wish me luck." And off she went, her pink sneakers lighting up with each step, hope restored. James walked over to Sophie's mother. Up close, he could see she was perhaps 35, with the same honey-blonde hair as her daughter, though hers was thin from treatment. Her name was Rachel, and her handshake was fragile, but her smile was warm. "I'm so sorry," Rachel said. Sophie got it in her head that she wanted to invite kind people from the park. "I've been bringing her here after my treatments. The fresh air helps, and she loves the ducks." She started noticing regulars, and when I told her she could have a small party, she decided this was how she wanted to do it. "It's actually lovely," James said, surprising himself. "Creative." "She doesn't understand why we can't invite family," Rachel said quietly. "They're all back in Ohio. We moved here for my treatment. There's a specialist at Columbia. My husband travels for work, gone 3 weeks out of 4. It's just been Sophie and me figuring things out together." They talked for a while. James learned that Rachel had been a teacher before the diagnosis, that Sophie loved books and drawing and asked 1,000 questions a day, that some days Rachel could barely get out of bed, but she still read to her daughter every night. When James walked home that evening, he took the invitation out 3 times just to look at it. Saturday arrived with clear skies and cool air. James found himself nervous, which was ridiculous. It was a child's birthday party. But he'd stopped at 3 stores before finding the right present, a beautiful picture book about a brave little girl on an adventure and a set of art supplies. Not too much, but thoughtful. The apartment building was modest, but well kept. He climbed to the 3rd floor and found apartment 3C, already hearing voices and laughter inside. Rachel answered the door, wearing a bright yellow dress and a genuine smile, though he could see the effort it cost her. "Mr. James!" "Sophie will be so happy you came." Come in, come in." The apartment was small and filled with sunlight and balloons. Sophie saw him and rushed over, still in her party dress, blue again, but fancier this time. "You came!" "You really came." "I promised, didn't I?" The party was unlike anything James had experienced. There were 10 guests, just as Sophie had planned. James, an elderly couple from the park who fed the ducks every morning, a young nurse who jogged past every day and always smiled, a quiet man who read philosophy on the south bench, 2 college students who studied together by the fountain, a woman who walked her elderly dog every afternoon, and a teenage girl who practiced violin near the playground. Strangers, all of them, brought together by a child's invitation and their own kind hearts. They ate pizza. Rachel had made a magnificent cake despite everything, chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, and when Sophie blew out her candles, all 10 of them sang. Some were off-key, some strong, some shy, but it filled that small apartment with something that felt like family. Sophie opened her presents. Each person had brought something simple but chosen with care. Books and art supplies and a stuffed duck and a music box. She thanked each person gravely, like she understood the gift wasn't just the object, but the showing up. As the afternoon wore on, James found himself talking with the others. The elderly couple had been married 62 years. The philosophy reader was a retired professor dealing with grief. The college students were far from home. Each of them had their own reasons for being alone in the park, their own quiet struggles, and each of them had said yes to a little girl's invitation. As the party wound down, James helped Rachel clean up while Sophie showed her presents to the remaining guests. "Thank you," Rachel said quietly. "You didn't have to come." "None of you did. But Sophie's been talking about this party all week. She was so worried no one would show up." "We showed up," James said simply. "You did," Rachel said, and her eyes were bright with tears. "You really did." As James was leaving, Sophie hugged his leg. "Will you come back to the park?" she asked. "Mommy and I go on Thursdays and Saturdays." "I'll be there," James promised. And he was. He started bringing bread for the ducks, which Sophie loved. The other party guests started coming by too, checking in, saying hello. The elderly couple brought soup one day when Rachel was especially tired. The nurse shared information about support groups. The philosophy professor started reading stories to Sophie while Rachel rested. That little girl's birthday party had somehow created a community where there had been none. 3 months later, James was sitting on his usual bench when Sophie ran up to him, her pink sneakers flashing. Rachel followed more slowly, but there was color in her cheeks, and her latest scans had shown improvement. "The treatment was working, Mr. James," Sophie said. "Guess what? I made a friend at school. Her name is Emma, and she likes to draw too." "That's wonderful, Sophie. But you're still my friend too, right?" "Always," James said. Rachel sat down beside him. "Thank you," she said. "For showing up that day, for keeping showing up." "Thank you," James said, "for inviting me. I was pretty lost when Sophie found me." They sat together in the autumn sunshine, watching Sophie chase falling leaves. Around them, the park continued its rhythm. People walking, living, struggling, persevering. And on Thursdays and Saturdays, a small community gathered, brought together by a child who'd understood something profound. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply ask people to show up and trust that maybe, just maybe, they will. Because in the end, that's what we all need. Not grand gestures or perfect families, just people willing to say yes. People willing to sit beside each other on park benches and show up for birthday parties and feed the ducks together and remember that none of us have to be alone unless we choose it. Sophie had taught them all that. Sophie, with her homemade invitations and her serious gray-blue eyes and her simple faith in the kindness of people who take time to say, "Excuse me," when they walk past. And James, sitting in the autumn light, thought about how sometimes salvation comes not in the form you expect, but in the form of a 4-year-old girl with pink sneakers who sees you when you feel invisible and invites you to show up. And that, he'd learned, makes all the difference.